Now, let's discuss the concept of keyframes, which are really essential in After Effects to understanding how to use this program. So, to do that first, I'm going to actually remove these three video clips. I'm going to make a new solid layer, just a solid color, to illustrate what we're talking about here. So, if I go to my layer menu, choose New, New Solid, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller than the size that we're working at here. So, I'm going to make this, say, 400 by 300 pixels. And I'm going to make it, well, let's make it red, just to make it real easy to see. So I've just made a bright red square. As you see, that's what a solid is. Now, this can be scaled, of course, to any dimensions that I want, but this is the basic dimensions of this solid. As I click on it, I can drag it around, as you see, as we did before. The solid defaults to the full length of our composition here, our full 20 seconds, because that composition was based on the original duration of the dogwood footage that we brought in here before. So now we have a solid, which is not doing anything. It doesn't animate. There's no inherent video motion in there. It's not a video layer. It's just a still, essentially, a still solid color. And this is how we're going to demonstrate our keyframes. Now, the idea of keyframes goes back to the original days of animation, the original days of stop motion animation. And as you probably know, animation was originally done, back basically around 1900 or so, by drawing individual frames, drawing individual pictures, and photographing those one at a time with a movie camera, basically, and then showing those in succession fast enough to create the illusion of motion. So you would basically draw an image that was a character in one position, you draw another one very slightly later with that character sort of lifting a foot. The next one would be the character lifting a foot even a little bit more, and so forth. And eventually, very laboriously, you would create enough frames so that you would create an entire step of that character. And that might say, take a second, 24 frames a second, that's 24 frames. And so a minute of that is, several thousand frames. So essentially you're talking about a lot of work there in drawing those keyframes. And essentially that was how it was done, by hand drawing those keyframes. So those individual frames were called, well, they were just called frames, essentially. So very early on, the animators discovered that they could save time instead of drawing every single frame and all the details in that frame anew every time by doing things in layers. And that's really kind of where way back, the original concept of layers that After Effects uses started with. So they would have a solid background that would be nicely painted, woods and fields and things like that. And then they would have transparent layers on top of that, using celluloid, which is where the term animation cell comes from that transparent celluloid sheet. And they would then draw the characters on that in ink and then fill them in and so forth, and then lay that on top of the background so that the background didn't have to be drawn every time. And eventually they got to the idea where they realized that they would only have to do individual parts of those characters, maybe just move the legs and things like that instead of the torso as well. So they started breaking these elements down into smaller and smaller components. So it still required a lot of drawing to do that. And the director of the picture, with the cartoon, let's say we're talking about a traditional Warner Brothers type cartoon here, the director was the one who would actually decide where the key motion would occur. So key scenes, the director himself typically would draw. And that might be, say, in a Bugs Bunny cartoon, the scene where Bugs Bunny is swinging a baseball bat at Elmer Fudd's head. And the actual scene, the impact of the baseball bat on Elmer's head would be one key scene, one key shot. And the key animator, typically the director, would draw that himself. Then he wouldn't draw all the other frames. He would just draw these key frames. So there might be the one of Bugs winding up. There might be the one of Bugs actually hitting. And then there might be Elmer's reaction, say. Those would be three key frames. And as I mentioned, the director himself, being the lord of the project there, would not do the rest of the animation himself. That would fall to what were called the in-betweeners, also known as slaves. So the in-betweeners would draw all those in-between frames based on the keyframe that the key animator had created. So multiple keyframes and then in-betweens were then what made up the entire picture itself. So in After Effects and in any other type of computer animation program, essentially what you're doing is that you are the keyframer and the computer is the slave. You generate the key motion points, and the computer will do all the fill-ins, all the in-betweens in between those key motion points. And that is essentially the concept of keyframing. You specify motion at particular points in time, the particular states of whatever it is that you're doing, and the computer will fill in all the frames in between so that you don't need to specify exactly everything that happens. So let's say I want to have this solid come into the frame and just move across the frame in a very stately sort of manner. So if I were doing this in the original sort of every frame style, I'd go here and I'd tell After Effects to record a frame at that particular point. And then I'd go here and I'd say, record the next frame at this point. And then I'd say, do that and do that, or do that, record that frame, do every single one of those frames, and then sequence those together to make a movie clip. So we really don't want to do that, of course, because we don't want to do every single frame in there. We want the computer to do as much as possible. So the way that that works is that we specify those keyframes and the computer will do the in-betweens. So what I'm going to do in our next video is show you exactly how you specify those keyframes and how we can then preview the motion that's created to get us started with the very basics of animation.